They were warned again and again, but they didn't listen. That is how every tale of arrogance begins, and how many end, with silence where once there was noise. When the alien fleets first came to the edges of our solar system, there were messages waiting for them. Not hostile, not threatening, but firm. They carried simple words. Earth has borders. Do not cross them. The words were not carved in stone, not etched with divine fire, but written in the quiet signals and warnings that spread across the stars like whispers. Yet whispers are easy to ignore, and pride is heavier than reason. The Armadas kept coming, and then they were never seen again. The universe is filled with countless civilizations. Some rise, some fall, most think they are the center of it all. To the distant empires watching Earth from afar, humanity seemed fragile, a species too young, too chaotic, too fractured to matter. They saw a planet buzzing with noise, countless tribes shouting over one another, fighting wars, building weapons, making machines, dreaming of futures they might never reach. To these outsiders, Earth was not a threat. It was a resource, a place to exploit, a stepping stone on the path to greater power. So when they received the warnings, they laughed. Why should they fear a blue-green world whose people still argued over borders on their own soil? Why should they respect boundaries marked by a species barely touching the edges of space? But humanity had changed in ways no outsider could fully understand. We are not a people who build our strength in straight lines or in predictable patterns. Our history is a patchwork of collapse and rebirth, of struggle and innovation, of mistakes that force us to climb higher. And in the quiet between our wars and the shadows of our disasters, we learned something the alien empires did not. We learned to adapt faster than any of them could imagine. We learned how to turn weakness into survival, and survival into something sharper. When the first alien scouts arrived, they didn't come with fire. They came with the calm arrogance of explorers, certain they would find no resistance. Their ships were vast, sleek, and filled with technology far older than our nations. But the moment they breached the invisible line that marked Earth's claim, the silence swallowed them. No distress calls, no wreckage, no drifting survivors, only absence. The Armadas had ignored the warnings, and the galaxy began to whisper of their disappearance. It is said that humans are small compared to the giants of the cosmos. We do not have fleets that span galaxies, nor do we wield weapons capable of burning suns. What we have instead is something harder to measure, something that doesn't shine on charts or maps, a hunger to endure, no matter the odds. That hunger had been woven into our defenses long before the aliens came close. Earth's borders were not marked by lines drawn in space, but by something far more dangerous. The will of those who called it home. Those who watched from afar were confused. Armies of entire worlds had vanished. Empires that had never known defeat found themselves humbled by a world they had dismissed as primitive. Whispers spread of strange weapons hidden beneath the oceans, of warships cloaked in silence, of traps laid across the stars themselves. Others claimed it wasn't weapons at all, but humanity itself, the spirit that had fought off extinction countless times, that had risen up to defend the planet in ways no outsider could predict. Whatever the truth, the fact remained the same. Fleets that entered Earth's borders never returned. And yet, the warnings did not stop. They pulsed steadily through the void, repeating the same message: do not cross. Do not enter. Do not test what waits for you here. For some, it was enough. They stayed back, watching carefully, unwilling to risk the fate of those before them. But for others, the call of pride was too strong. Armadas gathered again and again, convinced they would succeed where others had failed. They believed the vanished fleets were victims of accidents, of cosmic storms, of anything but human resistance. And one by one, they too disappeared. Back on Earth, humanity did not boast. There were no celebrations broadcast into space, no grand announcements of victory. Instead, the people carried on with their lives, quietly aware that their survival had drawn new eyes upon them. In crowded cities and quiet villages, in laboratories and launch stations, there was a shared understanding. The galaxy now knew Earth was not to be taken lightly. The silence of the vanished fleets had spoken louder than any words could. But silence is never permanent. For every empire that respects a border, there is another that seeks to cross it. For every warning, there is someone who dares to test its truth. And as more fleets gathered in the dark, humanity knew the story was only beginning. This is not just a tale of warships and vanished armadas. It is a story about what happens when arrogance collides with survival, when those who think themselves untouchable learn that the smallest voice can carry the sharpest blade. It is about the unseen strength of a species that has been underestimated too many times before. And somewhere, even now, in the quiet void beyond our world, another fleet drifts closer. Another commander, proud and certain, looks upon Earth and sees nothing but opportunity. They ignore the warnings, convinced the silence of the vanished fleets is only rumor. They set their course for the borders of our world, unaware that they are about to join the long list of those who never returned. What happens next is the part of the story that no one forgets. It is where the truth behind the silence finally begins to surface, and where humanity's place in the stars is decided once and for all. The question is not whether the warnings will be ignored again. The question is what will happen when the next armada crosses the line and discovers what truly waits beyond Earth's borders. The fleet that drifted closer was not the first, but it carried the same certainty as all the others before it. They had studied the records of the missing, analyzed what little fragments remained of transmissions, and still they concluded the same thing. Earth could not have been the cause. To them, the idea that a single young world, barely touching space, could stop an armada was laughable. They believed in chance, in misfortune, in storms of radiation or hidden anomalies, anything but resistance. And so they came forward, slow but steady, with banners of conquest folded into their hearts. The background of those warnings was not clear even to humanity itself. Most people on Earth lived their lives without ever seeing the signals or hearing the echoes that carried across the void. To the average family, the idea of alien fleets approaching Earth was nothing more than rumor, whispered on late-night broadcasts or buried in obscure reports. The governments spoke little about it. The media filled the silence with speculation, and those who truly knew the truth kept their voices measured. The story of the vanished armadas was not one for the comfort of crowds. It was for the quiet rooms where decisions were made, where strategies were drawn up in the shadows. Yet, beneath the surface of ordinary life, Earth was preparing. Deep beneath oceans, in mountain bunkers, and in orbital stations hidden from alien eyes, humanity worked with a unity rarely seen in its own history. The warnings were not empty words. They were placed carefully, deliberately, with the knowledge that they might be ignored. They were a line in the sand, written not in arrogance but in necessity. Humanity had survived too much, lost too much, to allow strangers to treat the Earth as a stepping stone. The old rivalries between nations still existed, but in the face of the wider universe, something had shifted. Quietly, the leaders of Earth had agreed on one thing. Whatever came for them would find not a divided planet, but a people willing to stand together when the stars demanded it. Still, the alien empires did not see this. They watched from afar and believed humanity fractured and naive. They saw us as a world of noise, endlessly arguing, endlessly struggling against ourselves. What they missed was the truth that in chaos, humans had always found strength. From wars, we built technology. From disasters, we learned resilience. From near collapse, we built the means to rise again. And all of that, every fragment of struggle and survival, had been woven into the defenses that now surrounded Earth. The new armada was vast, larger than the last, bristling with weapons forged in ancient forges light years away. They carried technology older than human civilization itself, ships that had burned through the skies of a dozen conquered worlds. Their leaders spoke of victory as though it was certain. Their soldiers spoke of spoils that would be taken from Earth. In their minds, they were not approaching danger. They were approaching opportunity. The idea of defeat had never entered their thoughts, but somewhere in the shadows of their confidence there was unease. Rumors spread among their lower ranks about the silence of the fleets that came before. Some whispered that Earth was cursed, that the blue world was protected by forces beyond reason. Others dismissed such talk as fear. Still, the whispers grew, carried in secret conversations between soldiers, in glances exchanged in dim corridors of starships. They had heard of planets resisting before, but never of entire fleets simply vanishing. Even empires with weapons strong enough to shatter moons had never faced such mystery. Meanwhile, on Earth itself, life moved forward in strange contrast. Children went to school, workers filled their hours, cities lit up their skies as though the stars above were not watching. Yet under this surface, in places the public never saw, preparations deepened. Engineers tested weapons that few had ever dreamed could exist. Scientists pushed the limits of physics itself, building machines that blurred the line between known science and legend. Soldiers trained not only on the ground but in simulations of the void, learning tactics against ships that dwarfed their own. Humanity was not perfect, but it was ready in its own way. The warnings were not sent to provoke fear. They were written in the language of survival, a language humanity understood well. They were not meant to boast, but to offer a choice: stay away and live. Cross the border and accept the silence that followed. It was a simple message, one that should have been clear. Yet arrogance is a blinding force, and the alien Armada believed themselves immune to consequences. As their ships drew nearer, the galaxy watched. Other civilizations, far from Earth, sat in uneasy anticipation. Some hoped to see humanity broken, their warnings revealed as empty threats. Others hoped for the opposite, that the mysterious strength behind Earth's silence would rise again, a proof that even the mighty could be humbled. But no one knew for certain, and that uncertainty was what gave the story power. The deeper truth of Earth's borders was known only to a few. The warnings were not the whole of it. The silence of the vanished fleets was not an accident. Something waited in the dark, hidden behind the simple words that pulsed into space. Humanity's strength was not in one weapon, not in one machine, but in the way its history had shaped it into something unpredictable. And unpredictability, in a universe ruled by order and power, was the most dangerous weapon of all. For those aboard the alien Armada, the stars seemed calm, the journey steady. Yet in their calm was the first mistake. They did not see the subtle shifts in the void, the faint movements in the darkness. They did not notice that the silence itself had weight, as though the space around Earth was not empty but waiting. And waiting always has a purpose. Back on Earth, few people knew how close the Armada had come. Those who did remained silent, carrying the burden of knowledge in their quiet lives. In control rooms beneath mountains, in stations hidden beyond the clouds, in outposts buried deep within seas, eyes tracked the slow approach. Orders were not shouted but whispered, calculated with patience. No one rushed, because humanity had learned long ago that survival was not about striking first. It was about striking when the moment demanded. The tension grew with every passing day. The alien fleet crossed deeper into the zone that had claimed so many before them. Their leaders mocked the warnings as superstition, dismissing the fate of the earlier fleets as cosmic accident. But not all of them believed those words. Among them were voices of caution, voices that urged retreat. They were ignored, just as Earth's warnings had been ignored, and so the fleet pressed forward, proud and blind, into the silence that had swallowed others. What they did not know was that every step closer brought them not toward conquest, but toward the same fate that had erased the Armadas before them. The stars around Earth were not quiet by accident. They were quiet because humanity had made them so. The stage was set, the pieces moving into place. On one side, an empire convinced of its power. On the other, a world forged from struggle, waiting in silence. The warnings had been given, ignored, and soon the truth would be revealed again. But for now, the void held its breath, and the question remained. When the Armada finally crossed the final line, what would they find waiting in the shadows of Earth's borders? The alien Armada slipped deeper into the quiet dark, their ships gliding forward like shadows across a sea. From the outside, their formation looked flawless, every vessel moving in harmony, their weapons humming with restrained power. Yet within their walls, cracks were beginning to show. Officers whispered in private chambers about the fleets that had gone before them, about the silence that had followed. Some dismissed it as rumor meant to weaken morale, but others could not ignore the unease that grew with every step closer to Earth. The commanders of the fleet carried themselves with pride. They told their soldiers that Earth was nothing, a young planet whose warnings were the last defense of the weak. They spoke of resources waiting to be harvested, of technology to be claimed, of people who would fall in awe at the sight of their ships. But pride is a fragile shield, and even among the leaders there were doubts. One in particular, a strategist with eyes that had seen too many wars, kept his worries quiet. He studied the pattern of disappearances, the sudden breaks in communication, the lack of wreckage. None of it made sense. Fleets do not simply vanish, not even in the strangest corners of the galaxy. Something was at work here, something no one was ready to face. Back on Earth, the tension was no less heavy. In the underground command centers, where glowing screens mapped the stars, every flicker of movement from the Armada was tracked. The watchers were silent, their faces calm but their hands clenched tight around the edge of their consoles. They had seen this before. They had watched other fleets cross the same line, always with the same arrogant certainty, always with the same end. But knowing what had happened before did not make the waiting easier. Humanity did not cheer when fleets vanished. They held their breath, aware that each approach tested the very edge of their survival. Among the scientists and engineers, debates raged quietly. Some believed that the Armada's disappearances were a matter of technology, machines hidden in orbit, weapons placed beyond ordinary detection. Others argued that it was more than technology, that humanity had reached into something the aliens could not yet grasp. The truth, as always, was buried somewhere between speculation and secrecy. Few knew the whole of it, and those who did kept their silence. Secrets were not shared widely, for the cost of exposure was too great. Ordinary people on Earth lived in ignorance of the looming threat. Most carried on with their lives, unaware of how close the Armada had come. Yet there were some who suspected more than they were told. Strange signals sometimes reached amateur radio operators, patterns of noise that did not belong to the usual chatter of satellites. Skywatchers noticed formations moving faintly against the stars, then disappearing in moments. Those who whispered of alien fleets were often dismissed as dreamers, but they were not wrong. In the cracks of daily life, fragments of truth leaked out, and the unease spread like smoke through the minds of those willing to look closer. The conflict between Earth and the approaching Armada was not only a matter of weapons. It was a clash of belief. To the aliens, the galaxy was built on hierarchy, on the strong consuming the weak. To them, Earth was weak. To humanity, however, survival had never depended on power alone. It was about defiance, about finding ways to turn weakness into strength, about refusing to bend even when logic suggested surrender. This clash of worldviews was as sharp as any blade, and it echoed in the silence between the warnings and the fleets that ignored them. Far away, in another part of the galaxy, smaller civilizations watched nervously. Some had already suffered at the hands of the same empire whose fleet now approached Earth. They remembered how their skies had burned, how their defenses had fallen. To them, Earth was not just another world at risk. It was a chance to see justice, to see arrogance punished. They followed the whispers of the vanished Armadas with hope. If Earth could hold its own, perhaps others could too. Perhaps the galaxy was not as rigidly ordered as they had been forced to believe. Among the alien soldiers, another subplot was quietly unfolding. One group of younger recruits had begun to question the orders they were given. They had grown up hearing of Earth in scattered reports, always with a tone of contempt from their leaders. But the more they learned, the more uncertain they became. Why had Earth warned instead of attacked? Why had fleets vanished without leaving behind wreckage? Why had no survivors returned with stories of what they faced? These questions ate at them, gnawing away at their certainty. And in their private conversations, they began to wonder if perhaps they were marching not into battle, but into a trap they could not yet see. On Earth, tension built among the hidden defenders as well. Not every leader agreed on how to face the approaching Armada. Some wanted to unleash the full extent of their power immediately, to end the threat before it grew. Others urged patience, to let the aliens cross deeper into the border before striking, to make an example of their arrogance. In the debates that followed, one truth became clear. Whatever decision was made, humanity could not reveal too much. To show the full strength of what they had would mean giving away their greatest advantage: mystery. It was the unknown that kept the galaxy on edge, the silence that unsettled those who sought to invade. And so the argument dragged on, tension sharpening with every passing hour. The Armada continued forward, their leaders blind to the weight of their choice. They believed they had already won, that Earth's silence was fear. They spoke of their coming conquest with certainty, promising riches and glory to their followers. But glory built on arrogance is fragile, and it cannot withstand the truth when it finally arrives. Still, the Armada had not yet reached the final line. They drifted closer, testing the patience of those who watched from Earth. In the skies above, faint signals stirred. Machines hidden in the dark began to shift, ready but waiting. The silence was no accident, no void without purpose. It was the stillness before the storm, the breath held before the strike. Humanity knew this, and so did those who had vanished before. The question was whether the new Armada would realize it in time, or whether they too would disappear into the quiet, leaving nothing but unanswered questions behind. The conflict was no longer just about a border. It had become a story of survival that stretched beyond Earth, a signal to every civilization that watched from the shadows. The warning was clear, the choice still theirs, but pride always demands proof. And as the Armada pressed further, Earth stood ready, silent but unbroken, waiting for the moment when the truth could no longer be denied. The stars around them seemed unchanged, but every light in the void hid the weight of countless eyes watching. The next move would decide everything, but for now the galaxy remained still, holding its breath as the Armada drew closer and closer to the edge of silence. The alien Armada moved closer, their ships gliding in perfect silence as though the void itself had bent to their will. To the commanders, it was proof of their superiority. No resistance, no interference, only the cold stretch of stars ahead. Yet to those watching from Earth, it was the stillness before something inevitable. In bunkers deep beneath the crust, in towers that looked toward the sky, in stations hidden on the edge of the atmosphere, every eye stayed fixed on the approaching swarm. There was no celebration, no boasting, only patience, and the quiet understanding that this moment was the threshold. The fleets that had disappeared before had crossed the same boundary. They had ignored the warnings, confident in their strength, and then they had been erased from the sky. Now, as the new Armada approached, the question on every tongue was the same. Would this end differently, or would history repeat itself in silence? Humanity had seen too many threats rise, too many dangers ignored, to believe that arrogance would learn its lesson. Pride never listened. Pride always demanded proof. On Earth, the people were not told the details, but rumors bled through. Strange reports slipped into the cracks of everyday life. Some claimed they saw new constellations form in the night sky, brief shapes of light moving against the stars before vanishing again. Others spoke of strange tremors beneath the oceans, of vibrations in the air that hummed just out of human hearing. In cities, whispers spread that another Armada was near, that humanity was once again facing the test that had come too many times before. The governments offered calm words, assuring the public that Earth was safe. But calm words only sharpened suspicion. People could feel it in their bones, that something was coming. Among the watchers in the command centers, the tension had become unbearable. Rows of screens lit up with every movement of the approaching ships, every flicker of energy detected on their hulls. Some of the younger analysts whispered about what would happen when the Armada crossed the final line. They had read the records of what came before, but the records gave no detail, only silence. There were no logs, no transmissions, no survivors. Even those who had seen it with their own eyes never spoke of what they had witnessed. That secrecy built a weight heavier than fear itself. Whatever had happened before would happen again. But no one outside the inner circle of leaders knew how or why. In orbit, hidden among the shadows of debris and disguised satellites, machines shifted into readiness. They hummed quietly, unseen, waiting for the moment when they would be called. Some were older than most people realized, created in years when humanity's survival had felt most fragile. Others were new, born of desperate innovation, crafted in hidden labs with materials pulled from the bones of Earth itself. Together, they formed a net of defense so intricate and silent that not even the alien fleet had detected it. But still, the order had not been given. They would not act until the final line was crossed. Humanity had chosen patience as its weapon, and patience demanded stillness until the moment was right. Among the alien fleet, unease had begun to ripple deeper. The soldiers whispered when their commanders were not listening. They asked why the fleets before them had never returned. They asked why Earth's warnings were so simple, so direct, and yet so unwavering. Some began to fear they were not approaching a conquest, but a grave. Yet their leaders pressed forward, unable to turn back. To retreat now would be to admit weakness before the entire galaxy. Their empire had built its power on fear, on dominance, on the promise that no world could stand against them. To hesitate now would unravel everything. Pride was their fuel, but it was also their chain. One of the commanders stood on the deck of the lead vessel, staring at the faint blue dot in the distance. It looked so fragile, so small compared to the vastness of the fleet, and yet something about it unsettled him. He remembered the silence of the other fleets, remembered the faces of those who had vanished into the void. He wanted to speak, to caution his fellow leaders, but the words stuck in his throat. To question now would mean exile, shame, perhaps even death. And so he remained quiet, staring at the planet that seemed to grow larger by the hour, feeling the weight of something unseen pressing against him. Back on Earth, the hidden councils gathered. They spoke in hushed voices, their arguments circling the same dilemma. Should they strike first, ensuring the fleet never came closer? Or should they wait, as they always had, allowing the invaders to cross the line and seal their own fate? The room was filled with tension. Some argued that patience was too dangerous, that the Armadas' weapons could strike the planet itself if they came any nearer. Others countered that humanity's strength lay in mystery, and to act too soon would reveal too much. The final decision rested in silence, with eyes turning toward the few who knew more than the rest, the ones who carried knowledge of what had truly happened to the fleets before. They said nothing, only watching as the debate burned around them. The galaxy itself seemed to hold its breath. Other civilizations, watching from afar, grew restless. Some prepared their own fleets ready to move if Earth fell. Others pulled back, terrified of what might unfold. For years, the question of Earth's borders had been a matter of rumor and legend, but now it was about to be tested again. Every world, every empire, watched the unfolding approach as though the outcome would shape the balance of the stars themselves. On the ground, people felt the tension without knowing its cause. A strange weight hung in the air, a heaviness that touched every conversation. Farmers stared at the skies longer than usual. Travelers paused before leaving their cities. Children asked questions their parents could not answer. Humanity could sense when the world was shifting, when something greater loomed just beyond their reach. And now, even without knowing the details, they felt it again. The alien fleet was now only a breath away from crossing the final threshold. Their ships glowed faintly as they adjusted formation, preparing for the moment they would unleash their power. They spoke among themselves with forced confidence, voices raised louder than necessary to drown out their own fear. But fear was there, crawling beneath the surface, and it grew stronger with every second. In the command centers, alarms began to pulse softly. The lines were being crossed. Warnings had been given, ignored once more. The moment of decision had arrived. Every screen flickered with red markers, every operator tensed, every leader leaned forward in silence. The weight of history pressed against them. And then, in the black void just beyond Earth's reach, the first ship crossed the invisible boundary. The fleet followed, countless vessels sliding into the forbidden zone. On Earth, eyes widened, hands hovered over controls, hearts pounded. The Watchers knew what had happened before, and they knew what was about to happen again. Yet still, nothing moved. The void remained silent, as if holding back the inevitable. The alien fleet pressed deeper, their commanders triumphant, their soldiers nervous. They thought the silence was weakness. They thought humanity had nothing left to offer but empty words. But silence is not always weakness. Sometimes silence is the sharpest blade of all. And so the moment tightened, stretched to the breaking point. Every side, every watcher, every heart across the galaxy leaned forward, waiting to see what would come next. The invasion had begun, the border had been crossed, and the silence itself seemed ready to shatter. The alien fleet had crossed the line, and the silence that followed was unbearable. Every ship drifted deeper into the forbidden zone, their engines glowing faintly as they rearranged into attack formations. On Earth, the hidden watchers leaned forward, their breaths shallow, their hands tight on controls they had been told never to touch until the last possible moment. The warnings had been ignored, the threshold had been broken, and now all that remained was the question of what would happen next. For a heartbeat, it seemed that history would repeat itself. The same vanishing, the same sudden erasure into the void. But this time, something was different. The alien fleet did not disappear. Their signals still pulsed through the darkness, their ships still visible on every tracking screen. Humanity's defenders stiffened. The usual silence, the pattern they had come to expect, had not arrived. Instead, the enemy remained, alive and advancing. Shock rippled through the command centers. Operators exchanged frantic glances. Analysts began recalculating every possibility, their voices quick and unsteady. Had the Armada discovered a way to survive the unseen defenses? Had they found the weakness humanity had kept hidden? The questions hung heavy in the air, but no answers came. All they knew was that the silence had broken, not by attack, but by survival. The alien commanders wasted no time. They broadcast a message into the void, their voices laced with arrogance. They declared Earth's warnings empty, called humanity weak, and promised that their victory would echo across the stars. Their message spread far, bouncing from relay to relay until the entire galaxy could hear. To the watching civilizations, it seemed as though the legend of Earth's borders was crumbling. For the first time, a fleet had crossed and survived. Doubt began to stir. Was the mystery of the vanished armadas nothing more than coincidence, an exaggeration told too many times? But Earth's leaders knew better. They felt it in their bones. This was not the end of the mystery, but the beginning of something far more dangerous. If the Armada had survived the first threshold, it meant only one thing. Someone, somewhere, had tampered with the unseen defenses. Humanity's carefully hidden advantage had been compromised. The suspicion grew quickly. Within the councils, voices rose with anger and accusation. How could the aliens still be standing? Who had betrayed the secret that had kept Earth safe for so long? Some argued it was impossible, that the aliens had merely been lucky, slipping through a gap in the unseen net. Others whispered of spies, of information leaked by hands too eager for profit or too desperate for survival. The idea of betrayal hung in the air like a shadow none of them wanted to face. Meanwhile, in the alien fleet, tension shifted. Their commanders basked in triumph, celebrating what they believed to be proof of their dominance. But among the soldiers, unease only deepened. They had crossed the border, yes, but nothing about it felt right. The silence around them was too heavy, too deliberate, as though the void itself was holding its breath. Some felt watched, others swore they saw flickers of movement in the darkness, shapes that vanished when they tried to focus. The commanders silenced them, insisting the only danger was fear itself. But fear has a way of growing stronger when ignored. Back on Earth, a second subplot began to surface. In the depths of the hidden bunkers, a small group of analysts had uncovered something strange. Patterns buried in the signals from the vanished fleets, fragments overlooked for years, now revealed themselves. It was not random silence. It was communication, coded, broken, scattered across the void. The fleets had not only vanished, they had tried to send messages before they disappeared. And now, those fragments pulsed faintly again, as though stirred awake by the approach of the new Armada. The discovery spread quickly among those who were trusted to know. Could it be that the missing fleets were not destroyed but taken? Was there something beyond Earth's borders, something far older, that had swallowed them whole? If so, what did that mean for the Armada now crossing the threshold? The questions struck like lightning, raising the stakes higher than anyone had imagined. Humanity was not just defending against invasion. They were standing on the edge of something larger, something hidden in the dark that neither side truly understood. The galaxy, too, felt the shift. Civilizations that had once mocked Earth's warnings now found themselves restless. The broadcast from the alien fleet had shaken their faith in the legend, but the rumors of coded messages unsettled them even more. If the fleets had been taken rather than destroyed, then the danger was not only Earth's, it was everyone's. Suddenly, the conflict was no longer just between humanity and one empire. It was a question of what lay waiting beyond the silence and who would face it first. In orbit, humanity's secret defenses stirred again, but hesitation gripped the leaders. To strike now would expose their hand to the entire galaxy. To wait might mean losing everything. The weight of the decision pressed hard. Some whispered that Earth was no longer in control, that whatever had claimed the vanished fleets was now playing its own game. The thought spread through the hidden rooms like fire. Humanity was not just defending itself anymore, it was standing in the path of something no one could name. Among the alien commanders, cracks widened. The strategist who had doubted from the beginning now felt certain. This was not victory, but a trap. He warned his peers, his voice low but urgent, that survival at the threshold meant only that something else was waiting deeper in. His warnings were dismissed as cowardice, but his words reached ears among the soldiers, fueling the quiet rebellion of fear already growing in their ranks. Some began to question whether they should turn back, even if it meant shame. But turning back was no longer simple. Once a fleet crossed the line, retreat was rarely an option. The tension on Earth grew unbearable. The Armada advanced deeper, emboldened by their survival, their voices louder with every broadcast. Yet the coded signals from the void pulsed louder too, strange echoes that seemed almost alive. The analysts worked desperately to decipher them, piecing together fragments of words, phrases that made no sense but carried weight all the same. One message repeated more clearly than the rest. It waits. No one knew what it meant, but the words were enough to spread unease through even the most hardened leaders. The conflict had escalated beyond its first shape. No longer was it only a test of Earth's defenses. Now it was a race to understand the true nature of the silence. Was it humanity's weapon alone, or was Earth merely standing on the edge of something far older, far greater than themselves? And if so, what would happen when the alien fleet went far enough to stir it awake? The alien armada pressed on, their ships forming into patterns of attack, their commanders boasting to the galaxy that Earth would soon fall. On Earth, the hidden defenders watched in silence, their fingers trembling over the controls, their leaders divided between action and restraint. In the galaxy, billions of eyes turned toward this single blue world, waiting for the moment when the truth would finally reveal itself. And then, as the fleet pushed deeper into the forbidden zone, the signals changed again. The coded fragments grew louder, clearer, not just echoes but voices. They did not sound alien, not entirely. Some sounded human. Others were something else, something no one could name. The analysts stared in shock as the words came together into a single phrase that chilled them all. Do not let them wake it. The words repeated again and again, pulsing through the void as the alien fleet advanced, unaware that they were moving closer to something even they could not conquer. The silence was breaking, the mystery unraveling, and humanity stood on the edge of revelation. But the fleet was already too deep to turn back, and whatever waited beyond Earth's borders was no longer sleeping. The climax loomed closer, and the galaxy knew it. The alien fleet drifted deeper into the forbidden zone, their ships cutting through the silence with arrogant confidence. Their commanders laughed over the open channels, their voices echoing across the galaxy as proof of their survival. On Earth, the watchers held their breath, their hands tight on the hidden controls. The coded warnings still pulsed in the background, whispering the same words again and again. Do not let them wake it. Nobody fully understood what it meant, but the urgency in those fragmented voices chilled every person who heard them. The fleet formed its attack lines, preparing for the strike that would prove their superiority. Across the galaxy, billions watched in anticipation. To them, it was a moment of history, the first time Earth's mystery would be broken. But on Earth, those who knew the truth were filled not with fear of invasion, but fear of what lay sleeping just beyond. The alien fleet had not broken through by strength alone. They had stirred something, and now the silence trembled. The first sign came as a ripple across the void, a vibration no sensors could fully explain. Lights flickered inside the alien ships, their systems glitching as if an unseen hand was brushing across them. Commanders barked orders, but their voices cracked with unease. The ripple grew into a low hum that resonated across every frequency, a sound that no one could escape. On Earth, the sound rattled through the bunkers, shaking walls and cutting through the air like a warning bell. The analysts stared in horror. The codes they had been deciphering were no longer fragments. They were now whole, flowing messages carried by the hum itself. "We are not gone. We are bound," the words repeated, building faster as the hum deepened. The vanished fleets had not been destroyed. They were trapped, imprisoned within the silence. And now, as the alien fleet pressed further, whatever force had bound them was stirring awake. Inside the alien ships, panic spread. Soldiers saw shapes moving outside their viewports, vast forms that dwarfed their ships, but every attempt to scan them showed nothing. The commanders shouted for discipline, insisting it was illusion, but the fear was too real to silence. Whole crews began to mutiny, desperate to turn back, but their engines sputtered as if the void itself refused to let them leave. On Earth, the leaders realized the truth with dreadful clarity. The silence was not their weapon alone. It was something older, something they had only stumbled upon, something that had swallowed entire fleets to keep itself hidden. They had built their defenses around it, never questioning too deeply, never daring to disturb it. But the alien fleet, in their arrogance, had gone too far. The Watchers faced a choice. They could trigger their hidden weapons, risking that any strike might awaken the thing fully, or they could hold back and pray the fleet destroyed itself. The debate raged in whispers, voices breaking under the weight of what was at stake. Finally, one of the commanders slammed his hand down and spoke the words none of them wanted to hear. "If it wakes, we all fall. We strike now." The defenses lit up for the first time in decades, hidden stations and cloaked weapons activating across the system. Energy flared through the void, striking the alien ships with brutal precision. Explosions filled the darkness as vessels shattered one after another, their commanders screaming across the open channels that Earth's warnings had been true all along. The galaxy watched in shock as the armada that had boasted of its strength was torn apart, but as the last of the ships burned, the hum reached its peak. The thing in the silence had been stirred awake by the violence, its presence undeniable now. The shadows outside the wreckage moved with purpose, vast and unending, their outlines flickering like broken stars. The coded voices grew louder, merging into a single roar. "We are bound! Free us!" And then, in an instant, the truth struck. The vanished fleets were not only trapped, they had become part of the thing itself. Their ships, their crews, their very essence had been absorbed into the silence. Every shadow was a fragment of what had once been, every hum a voice of those who had tried to fight. What stirred in the dark was not alien, not entirely. It was made of them, of those who had dared to cross the threshold and never returned. The Watchers froze, horror rooting them in place. The silence was not a weapon. It was a prison, and Earth had been guarding its door. The last of the alien fleet tried to retreat, their engines blazing, but the shadows wrapped around them like chains. One by one, their signals cut off, absorbed into the hum. The galaxy watched in disbelief as the mighty fleet disappeared, not destroyed by Earth's firepower, but swallowed by something far more terrifying. And then the hum stopped. The silence returned, heavy and complete, as though nothing had ever happened. The shadows faded into the void. The only proof of what had transpired was the echo that lingered in the minds of those who had heard the voices. On Earth, relief mixed with dread. The immediate threat was gone, the invaders defeated, but the truth they had uncovered was worse than any war. Humanity had not been saved by their strength alone. They had been spared because the silence had chosen to return to sleep. For now. But as calm settled, one final twist came. In the decoding room, a young analyst stared at the last signal that had come through before the hum vanished. It was not a plea. It was a warning. She read it aloud, her voice trembling. "They are not only bound here. They are waking everywhere." The room went silent. The leaders turned pale. The Watchers felt the weight of the words press down on them like stone. This was not just Earth's burden. The prison was breaking across the stars. The galaxy had seen Earth as a mystery, a power no one dared to cross. But now they would see the truth, that Earth was standing on the edge of something no one could control. And when the silence broke fully, when the bound fleets everywhere began to stir, no world would be safe. For the first time, humanity realized that the war with the aliens had only been a distraction. The real battle was coming, one that would not be fought between species, but against the silence itself. And the galaxy, whether it wished to or not, would have to face it together. The story of Earth's borders was no longer a legend. It was a warning, and it had only just begun. The room remained quiet long after the final signal faded. The analysts, commanders, and leaders who had spent years studying Earth's borders felt the weight of what had been revealed settle on their shoulders like stone. The warnings were not about victory, not about human power, but about survival. Humanity had been guarding something it barely understood, a prison that was never built to last forever. Now the realization spread like fire. The silence was waking, not just here, but across the stars. Yet even as fear gripped them, there was something else rising among the people of Earth. A sense of unity. For centuries, humanity had been divided, by nations, by politics, by distrust. But the truth that had unfolded in the skies had left no room for division. It did not matter what flag flew above a city or what language was spoken in its streets. The silence threatened them all the same, and for the first time in history, the entire planet felt the same weight pressing down. The story of vanished fleets, of warnings ignored, had become the story of humanity's place in the universe. The leaders worked quickly. The broadcasts went out across Earth, carefully worded, steady in tone, telling the public just enough to inspire resolve rather than panic. People were told that the invaders were gone, that the fleets had been stopped, but also that vigilance was required. The words were not heavy with despair, but filled with the call to prepare. Humanity had survived something unimaginable, and now they needed to take the lesson seriously. The silence could no longer be left unexplored. Scientists and engineers who had once worked in secret now shared their knowledge openly, pooling resources to study what had truly happened. In labs built beneath mountains and stations orbiting high above, teams replayed the captured signals again and again, searching for patterns. The haunting voices, the message of being bound, were no longer treated as myths or riddles. They became the foundation of a new science, one that looked beyond technology and into the deeper currents of existence itself. Humanity's greatest minds began to ask the questions that had once been dismissed as fantasy. What if the silence was not a weapon or a trap, but a force of nature? What if it was not simply holding the vanished fleets, but feeding on them? And most important of all, how much longer could it be contained? Amid all the work and research, there were personal stories too. Families who had feared invasion could finally breathe. Soldiers who had stood watch on the borders returned to their homes. And ordinary citizens found themselves reflecting on the fragility of their place in the cosmos. People told each other stories of the vanished Armadas, stories that carried both fear and pride. Fear, because no one could deny the danger that still lurked unseen. Pride, because humanity had endured. Against impossible odds, they had not bent or broken. The legend of Earth's borders grew not as a tale of violence, but as a story of survival. In the councils where humanity's future was planned, debates raged. Some argued that Earth should close itself off completely, guarding its skies and refusing to venture outward until the silence was fully understood. Others argued the opposite, that humans could no longer remain in one place, waiting for the silence to swallow them. They needed to expand, to seek allies, to spread across the stars, so that no single world carried the full weight of the threat. There was no easy answer, and perhaps there never would be. But what mattered most was that the conversation was no longer divided by borders. The people of Earth were speaking as one species, bound together by what they had witnessed. Beyond Earth, the galaxy watched in stunned silence. The once arrogant empires who had mocked humanity's warnings now regarded the blue-green world with a mix of respect and unease. They had seen fleets vanish without a trace, seen shadows move through the void, heard the voices carried by the hum. No one could deny Earth's power any longer, but more importantly, no one could deny the danger surrounding it. Rumors spread quickly through distant systems. Earth was not just a planet. Earth was a threshold. Those who had once planned conquest now sent cautious messages of alliance, offers of cooperation. For the first time, humanity was not seen as prey or resource, but as keeper of a secret that mattered to them all. The years that followed were not simple. The silence did not roar again, but it never fully left either. It pulsed faintly, always on the edge of perception, as if reminding everyone that it was still there. Researchers called it the heartbeat of the void. Every time the pulse came, people remembered the vanished fleets, the warnings, the shadows. But instead of breaking under fear, humanity grew stronger. They built new defenses, yes, but also new ships meant not for war alone, but for exploration, ships that could travel far enough to see if the silence truly was waking in other parts of the galaxy. Humanity was no longer content to hide behind its borders. The mystery was too great, and the risk of waiting too dangerous. And through all of this, the old warnings continued to echo. Do not cross. Do not enter. Do not test what waits here. The warnings had been ignored once, and countless lives were lost. But now, they had a new meaning. They were not just a barrier against outsiders. They were a reminder to humanity itself. Strength does not come only from defiance, but from knowing the weight of what you guard. The story of Earth's borders became more than a tale of warships and vanished armadas. It became a story about humility, about recognizing that survival sometimes depends on respecting forces beyond comprehension. It became a story about unity, about a species that had been fractured for so long finally finding common ground. And it became a story about the future, a future where humanity would step into the wider galaxy not as a weak and divided world, but as one voice, one people, carrying both the scars and the lessons of the silence. As the years turned, children grew up hearing the story as part of their history. They asked their parents what it had felt like to watch the skies darken with fleets, to hear the hum in their bones, to live in the moment when Earth's survival was uncertain. And the parents would answer not with fear, but with pride. They would say, "We were warned." They ignored it. "We endured." And so, the memory of the silence, the vanished armadas, and the guardianship of Earth's borders lived on, not as a burden, but as a guide. Humanity had faced the abyss and had not been consumed. And though the future still carried shadows, one truth remained clear. When the silence stirs again, Earth will not stand alone, and the galaxy will not ignore the warnings a second time. That was the lesson left behind. The key takeaway from a struggle that had shaken the stars. Borders are not just lines in space. They are promises, promises of survival, of unity, of defiance against the unknown. And in keeping that promise, humanity had secured not just its place in the galaxy, but its future. The story ended, not with fear, but with resolve. The silence would return one day, but when it did, Earth would be ready.